Welcome to DiGi YOUTH 2.0 podcasts. This project is co-financed by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union within Key Action 2, Cooperation for Innovation and the Exchange of Good Practices. In this series of podcasts, you will have the opportunity to listen to many amazing different hosts and experts explaining various different topics of youth work and especially digital youth work. To check out all the materials we have created within the DiGi YOUTH project, make sure you visit digi-youth.com. Enjoy! Hi everyone, welcome back to another DiGi YOUTH podcast. I'm Raya from the Future Now Association, a youth Bulgarian NGO, and I'm joined today by my colleague Ali. Ali, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Ali, as Raya said. I'm a project manager for the Future Now Association.
Yes, and the two of us have been working a lot on simulation games, learning games in the past few years, especially about games that are aimed at people and youth workers. So we wanted to share some insight today on why they are so important to us, what benefits we see in them, and why we recommend them as a tool for youth work overall. So I have a few questions for you, Ali. And I wanted to ask you to just speak freely and share your experience with and learning games with us. So my first question is, just to start off, can you just explain what simulation and learning games are and how they apply to youth work, just as a base?
Okay, so let's start by understanding what they are. First of all, so simulations are virtual environments that imitate real life situations, while learning games incorporate educational content into a game format. But if you think about it another way, both of them have the same objective. It's to enhance understanding and knowledge, and especially retaining knowledge, through an interactive and, let's say, an experiential learning. So when we apply this to youth work, these methods become particularly potent. One reason is that because today's young people they're pretty digitally literate. Some of them even, we can call them digital natives, because their timeline in the growth of technology made them surrounded by it. So it's a common occurrence that they are comfortable navigating digital spaces and sometimes prefer them from traditional learning environments, which is, let's say, formal education most of the times. So by bringing educational content in this familiar digital context, youth workers can make learning feel more relevant and engaging. Drawing, some examples that we have from the Future Now Association, and in other projects as well. We have the simulation of a political election, that can teach young people about the democratic process. They can take different roles in that simulation, for instance, and it educates them on the steps involved, but also the challenges and considerations. So a reason why we also use this in digital youth work is because the world of simulations and learning games is pretty safe and controlled environment for youngsters to experiment and make mistakes. There isn't as is in like traditional learning, let's say, situation, there isn't any real world fallout. Where you might make the point that in traditional learning, if you do not pay attention, you make mistakes, you are graded, and that grade might have, in the end, a real world fallout, let's say. But there's no repercussions for the actions within the game. It's just meant for you to try different things, try different strategies, make different mistakes, and gain some confidence from this. Another advantage is that these tools can also be adapted for a wide range of subjects, such as youth work is, because if you try to narrow down youth work, you can't say it's like A, B, and C. There's a lot of things that we can talk about. And you can see this also with our organization as well, that we do digital youth work, but we have the cyber, let's say, aspect of gender-based violence, and we have the digital aspect of, let's say, economics or civic engagement. So being in this very large landscape allows for a wide range of subjects and skill levels. So we can start from like teaching language to like complex simulations for economic principles. Another benefit also as well is that they are self-paced. So, usually in a traditional learning environment, the learners have to follow a progress that the rest of the class or the rest of the cohort has to follow. But in this digital space, you can take your time and literally take your time during the day. It doesn't have to be only in the morning, but it can be also later as well. So there's a lot of flexibility depending on your learning style and pace. So it's like in summary, I would say that simulations and learning games and youth work really tap into this digital savviness or digital savvy of young people, and it acts like a leverage for educational purposes. So we are transforming learning.
Yeah, I love that expression. It leverages.
Yeah, it leverages for educational purposes. So by transforming learning into a more active and engaging and safe process, we have the potential of making education more effective and enjoyable to youngsters.
Yeah, well, actually, I think you replied to my second question as well. I wanted to ask you about the difference in the benefits of a simulation game as compared to traditional teaching methods. But I think you also already mentioned a lot of them, like the flexibility of timing, of self-paced, the different environment.
More if you want.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, there are more, of course. So as I said, there's a significant shift from traditional learning methods, which you provide this interactive and immersive learning environment. In a traditional classroom, in formal education, and in some cases non-formal education, but let's focus, let's say, on the traditional classroom. Teaching is often one-directional. The teacher imparts knowledge and the students passively absorb the information. Now, this is like the stereotype that we're trying to break, right? In many cases, maybe in your personal experience, you saw students and teachers that were more engaging, but this is the leap this is the bridge we're trying to cross, the one directional part, and the passive absorption of knowledge. So in this approach, you usually have one sense that's engaged, which is listening or sight, if there's a text board or a board involved. While in simulation, you have more of, in a simulation and in learning games, you have more active engagement from students, immersing them in a learning process that demands their direct involvement. So instead of them being passively receiving information, they do it in a more active way. So they apply what they know and they test their theories and their mistakes in real time.
The concept of learning by doing.
Yeah, and when we do things, it's an experience. So this is the principles of, let's say, experiential learning, which suggests that experience is critical for deep, lasting learning. So in simulation games, exactly what you said, students have the chance of learn by doing. They make decisions. They have different strategies. They see the consequences of their choices and adjust their approach based on the outcomes, but like continuously, and having a continuous feedback loop, right? So you see what's going wrong at the same time, and you mend that mistake. And it makes for having a profound understanding of the subject matter. And I can go on if you want. So this another point of it is that it, as we talked before, just a bit before about learning styles and paces. So you can have more visual, auditory, and kinesthetic way. So some learners learn information more when they can visualize it instead of just seeing it written somewhere. Or others when they hear it again and again, because, when your professor, your teacher, your educator says something, they will repeat it. But if you have that at your, at the click of a button, you can hear it again and again. So simulations and learning games combine these elements to make sure that they're going to try to find every possible way of teaching you something. So it's more like the difference is the retention, because it's more of an experience. And it's nice to see sometimes in traditional education, in formal education, where the professor changes, let's say, the landscape of the of the classroom and opts for a more interactive approach. And usually we've seen either in studies but also in personal experiences that leads to a much larger, much more long-lasting retention of information and critical thinking as well.
Mm-hmm. When students are given the opportunity to adjust learning material to their own needs, I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. So you mentioned one of the games that we're working on earlier about the political system and how election cycles work. But can you give us some more examples of effective simulations or learning games that have a significant impact on youth learning? Maybe from our own experience. I know secretly that we have other games as well.
We do have, as like part of like Erasmus Plus projects, we do have other projects that have a simulation element built in it or a simulation learning game. Let's call it simulation and learning games as like one bunch. So we have those that are targeted towards media literacy. We have a project, we had a project in the past that was about media literacy, and the component that made it easier for youth to understand and be able to identify misinformation and propaganda and all sorts of non-ethical media, let's say. They were fake news, yeah. They were the youngsters were more able to find those, let's say, issues through the simulation game that we built, which was asking them different questions and making them being able to replay it again and again and having a point system. So that was one. Another one, we made a pretty visual game, which was a learning game about a video game about economic literacy. So this was a different approach. We went through more of a visual and repetition, and we focused also on auditory because you are immersed in this world where it has its own soundtrack and its own people, and you get to replay these the character that goes and tries to solve their economics homework, for instance. So this was a different approach.
Yeah, for that game, the other approach that I really enjoyed was that it had story, not just like continuous different scenarios or simulations that you kind of engage with, but instead it also had a story that you could follow. And I think that also engages a different type of learning, because as people, we relate to stories and we take them more to heart.
Yeah, exactly. Stories. This is one of the benefits of being able to tap into a digital world, is that you can try as a facilitator, as the youth worker, as the project manager, you're able to be very creative in a somewhat limitless space, and what other methods and tactics you want to use to enhance education. So experience is one thing, and stories is a very important other thing too. And we even use stories as an educational, let's say, factor in youth work. But this was in this case that we had as the Future Now Association, this the partnership that was an old partnership anyway, a previous project. We did use storytelling to teach youngsters about different educational topics such as biodiversity, gender equality, civic participation, and a lot of other things. You could make the argument that this could be also a digital version. It's something that we thought, right? But it would still have the same principles: experience, stories, replayability, and self-pace and fun, because they have to be fun. I'll get to the fun part later on. But the thing is, we of course didn't just start by ourselves thinking that video games are nice and simulation games are nice and learning games are nice. We had we had to follow the experience of others, and one of them actually, I don't know if you know this, is Minecraft. So Minecraft, there's like the Minecraft educational edition, or it's used for education. So Minecraft is a popular sandbox video game. So a sandbox video game is where you are in this digital space and you can do anything you want in it. Like you are in a big sandbox and all the variables are yours to manipulate and change. So you can create whatever you want. So Minecraft has this open world block building structure that allows youngsters to create and explore virtual environments. You can, I do suggest that you go on Google's, not just you, but our listeners, to go and see Minecraft in that way too, because they can do all sorts of things. I mean, there are some educators that created scenarios in it that teach math and science and history, and you can create historical monuments, and you can use the Minecraft blocks to demonstrate mathematical concepts, like at any age. And there's the multiplayer version of it too, which you can collaboratively learn and stuff. But the point was that they found a game like Minecraft, and educators, youth workers were like, okay, we can use this to do more at it. So other examples are simulation games about the stock market. There's a number of them where you're given X amount of money or funds, and you have to trade stocks and manage your portfolios and stuff like that. And this is there are games, but there are also actual software, because my background is in banking and finance. So we use the same kind of gamified experience of like, okay, you have X amount of money, X amount of resources. This could be anything, right? And you have to manage your resources, because in the end, this is stock market. But I could make the argument that you could do this for anything that needs let's say, a resource management skill. But at that point, you learn the value of your resources. Then you can do mistakes. You can create more complex financial concepts and try to solve them. Other games as well. There's one I actually found quite recently called iCivics. It's a non-profit NGO from the States, and it offers a different suite of games that aim to teach students about how the government works and civic duties. Games such as, like, there's one called Do I Have a Right? Which allows students to run their own law firm and, teach citizen rights and how laws apply in different scenarios. And something funny, that TFN is also involved in a project that would also simulate and educate about your rights, essentially, and elections. So these simulation learning games can be tailored, as in the case of Minecraft, for instance, to teach some specific topics. And they can then move on to other games that we have that, are regarding finance and economics. They're engaging, they're interactive, they're contextual, and they, allow learners to have a better, more profound, lasting understanding.
Yeah, perfect. Well, you mentioned the names of the other games, so I feel compelled to also say the names of our games. The game we created for media literacy is called Gamify. Mm-hmm. And the game we created for economic literacy, which you mentioned, was the video game that has the story element, and it's one of our more recent projects, and we're very proud of it. It's called Ceteris Paribus, which is our favorite economic term in Latin. But if you want to know more about that, you can go there and hear and learn and understand more about Ceteris Paribus and about economics.
Yeah, and I would also like to draw attention to the one that, we are doing this podcast for too. So DiGi YOUTH is DiGi YOUTH is a simulation learning game, because it covers both. There is a game aspect of it in which you are competing, you are trying to win awards and badges, not maybe positioning in a leaderboard, although the competitive element is like, how many times have you played this game? How long have you played the scenarios? And so there's a competitiveness in it, even though we try to eliminate that, because in learning, there isn't, the only competition is yourself in the end. So there's no point in having to compete with others, although we just left enough elements to make it sure that, to show that, you know, I have spent 20 hours on this, for instance, or I've played these scenarios, I've played every scenario. So this is a key part of gamification and simulation games as well. And within DiGi YOUTH, we took some concepts of gamification and added simulations to it in more of a written scenarios, fictional, and which are honestly drawn a lot from our own inspirations and you know, case studies, situations that we had to go through. And then the player in DiGi YOUTH has to go through a certain amount of questions regarding a scenario and how to solve this and what would be the best action to take and what would be the best tool. And I think it's very important because you get to replay this in case you're wrong on some things. In case you're right, that's really good. In case you're wrong, we also offer a list of resources and manuals that we have created so that you can solve this. Because in the end, this is a game that it can be played, it can be facilitated by a youth worker, but we're also intending for the use of youngsters that are at home, for instance, and they just want to go through this because they heard it's a pretty cool game. So in learning and simulations, there is the didactic aspect of it, and we try to supplement that with having like references to, okay, you didn't get these things right. Maybe you want to try to read this. So we're trying to combine, you know, traditional textbook reading with a game in it. And this is a concept that wasn't something from the past. I remember myself, because I used to be an avid gamer. Now I just don't have that much time or energy for it, at that level anyway. And so I remember from my past that there would be these games that had a manual with them. You know, you'd buy the cartridge or the CD, you know. After that, I was still at the time of cartridges. So you'd buy it and you'd have the manual, and you know, you couldn't get through a level. You're like, okay, what does this do? And then you have it right next to you. You have to read it. So we're still not trying to abolish, you know, traditional teaching styles. We're trying to enhance it, and this is what it does. Sorry, I think I went a bit off topic.
Perfect. No, it's still the topic of simulation games. I wanted to ask you, mentioned earlier a couple of times facilitators for playing simulation and learning games. What do you think is the role of facilitators or youth workers when young people are learning and using educational or simulation games?
Okay, so it's a pretty critical role, I would say, the role of the facilitator or youth worker in this case. First of all, we can break it down to, let's say, like 4 or 5 points. First of all is guidance and support. So in the context of playing learning games simulation, the facilitators and youth workers have a pretty important role in guiding and supporting the learners. While the learners are engaged in the game or simulation, the facilitators can clarify doubts and can ensure learners, let's say, to be focused on educational objectives. Because we've noticed from our own experiences, sometimes the students or the youngsters stray away from why they have to do this. So it's the role of the facilitator to be, okay, why, you know, you're doing this at the beginning to get them hooked. And also, for certain things, let's say there are some doubts about why this is happening, because we try to design a simulation game, a learning game, having, you know, an average point of view, but people may not, you know, fully understand that as well. So it's very important to support them in that case. Secondly, is to create a safe and positive learning environment. So sometimes youngsters might get frustrated, you know, with a game. Like, okay, why didn't they do this? And this was sometimes apparent in a bit more, I would say, difficult stages of some other simulation games that I've played. So the role is to create a positive learning outcome and a learning environment. a safe and positive one, where you can establish the rules for respectful communication and cooperation in case of a multiplayer game or a group simulation, because that is also a tool you can use. You could have a group simulation, like have a couple of youngsters and play all together. So you have to make sure, that the youngsters feel safe to experiment and make mistakes and ask questions, which are very essential to deep learning. Then, one, maybe I would say the most significant role is relating the game experiences to world concepts, to real world concepts. So you might, like in DiGi, we do have we draw inspiration from real world situations. But the youngsters may not be, because they haven't been in any situation like that, may not know that. And so they might be thinking, oh, this is just fiction. But no, this is real. And then it's the role of the youth worker to maybe debrief or have reflection sessions after the game and simulation, and provoke some thoughts and guide discussions and see how that the knowledge they learned in this game can be applied in the real world.
Yeah.
So this it goes together with facilitating the reflection. The reflection part is very important in education, I would say, but especially when you have an interactive space, because you are vulnerable in case you are vulnerable in the way that you are interacting with someone. So anytime we interact with someone, we are open. Instead of like traditional learning where, you take notes, you go back, and then you have your own thoughts. But here you're expressing them to another person or to a group. So facilitating the process of reflection is a very important and powerful learning tool. Reflection is, because you get to understand what you did, why you did it, and how it relates to other experiences or knowledge. So a good facilitator would encourage this during maybe and after, for sure, after the simulation, try to make sense essentially of their experience, because we're talking about experiential learning, and try to learn from them as well.
Do you think that playing without simulator kind of diminishes the value of the game? Do you think it's still a high quality educational experience, even if you're playing a simulation educational game on your own?
Yeah, as I said, the benefit of simulations and learning games, and especially in a digital sense, is that you may be one of those people, not one of those, and I'm not trying to say it's a minority, but you'll be one of the type of people that learn better on themselves and doing it again and again alone. I've seen a lot of people that they're like, I'm going to go home, I'm going to read, review, and redo everything I did again and again until I get it, right? So you have those types of learners, which they're okay. The part of the facilitator, maybe in that case, or part of us educating about the game, is to tell it, okay, you can do this alone. Of course, you don't need to talk, but it's our role to make sure that we explain the game pretty well, that someone can do that on their own. So in the case of DiGi, for instance, we have the manuals where it gives you a lot of guidance by itself, so you can do it alone.
It kind of does the job of the facilitation for you in this way.
Sure, if you have your own pacing, your own learning style, that helps in it, and that's why we put it in consideration when we create this kind of projects. Because it's so incentive is. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, but in Ceteris, the concept was also that you have a game which has, let's say, Ceteris was about economics and economic principles. But okay, it's a game which is it teaches you in its own way, but you will most probably have questions, even if you get them right, even if you understand them. You might have questions, you might want to dwell more into these topics. So we do provide the material for you, for the youngsters, to be like, okay, I heard about I'm trying to figure out economic concepts we've had. Inflation, let's say inflation. So, okay, I learned through the game, through one level, through one side, what is inflation, and hopefully you took enough to be able to repeat that. But maybe you want to learn how to explain that and learn more about it. So in this, let's say, more distant learning, because you're alone as a youngster playing the game on Steam, it's good to have some resources from the same people that wrote, the game, the partnership in this case. So yeah, sorry, I think I interrupted your question before.
No, don't worry. You mentioned something about a young person who decided that they to read, etc. Can you share a story about a young person who was particularly impacted by a simulation or a learning game that you've noticed or you've worked with?
Well, but this is a part which I don't know how to answer that well, because I can put myself into that context. So I had some contact with people that played the game because we, as an organization, we had to host events in which we showcase the game and ask people to play. I was going to say make people to play, but we asked them very politely and gently, can you play the game for us here so we can see you? You could see it at that point that things started making sense to people. And this is something you can only do by observing. You would go around the classroom, the space that we had rented for that day, and you would see people engaged and ask questions. Okay, but why is it like this? Why is the answer this? And you explain to them. At that point, you are, let's say, youth worker, facilitator, because you're imparting knowledge to another person that's asking for it. And another part is, so I don't have like a specific, I just know that participants and players of the game got hooked enough to ask for more. Not just more games, but okay, I'm gonna play this at home and see what it is. Or what is, this digital tool used for? Because I saw it in the game, but I don't know it. And okay, as a youth worker, I have to say, because I'm also a youth worker, I have to either tell them, it depends on me, I'll tell them, okay, it's this and this, or, we use it for this and this situation. So that's knowledge already. The person may not be interested in let's say, DiGi YOUTH anymore, or the other game, because they played it, it's gone. But if you kept 3-4 things from it, that's successful for me. Because let's say in DiGi YOUTH, we have some situations where we ask them which digital tool is best to solve X problem. And we list some of them. Chances are they're going to use one of them because this is at least the people are using. Like, okay, well, this is a free tool that you can use to visually enhance different posts and create resumes and blah blah blah. So there you go. You already have some knowledge into it too. And from my experience in simulation games and learning games is that it gets you thinking like a lot. And the fact that for me, I'm a very anxious and stressed person, as you may or may not have noticed on my cadence of speaking in this podcast. So for me, it relieved me of some extra anxiety that I would have had in a traditional learning environment. The traditional learning environment was not suitable for me. But as a youngster, I always fell in love with these kind of spaces and these opportunities. So for me, it affected me enough that I'm in a position, luckily, to be able to design these things, or at least attribute, for other youngsters. So it was more of a multiplying effect. I was affected by it at the point where this maybe wasn't the most common thing to do. And now I get to be able to engage with the youngsters and maybe create something, or at least have a contribution to it. So I think that's a pretty successful thing. I know the same also applies to you, being such an engaged person in all the projects that we do together. Having that, I can see you have that too. So it's like we are case studies ourselves to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes, like what you mentioned about the resources that we have listed, sometimes it's a learned resource in the game, and sometimes it gets you questioning enough that you do more research, or that you think, okay, if there are these tools for these situations, maybe there is a tool for my personal situation that I've been struggling with. So it's, like you said, it's something that sometimes answers your questions and sometimes it provokes questions, which are so really important in development and in growth.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. I have just one last question for you. We are the future now, but if we look to the future ahead, how do you see the role of simulation games and learning games in youth work? How do you see that role evolving or finding a new space for itself?
So there are a couple of points that I've gathered throughout, like the planning, the brainstorming of these kind of projects, and things I would like to see in the future. So first of all is integration. We need to see an increase in integration of simulation and learning games in both formal and non-formal educational settings. Because as technology continues to advance and become more accessible, the educators and youth workers, it's good to have more tools at their disposal or use those resources. So for me, integration in either formal or non-formal or informal educational settings is one thing I'd like to see in the future. Then this is something I've been battling a bit because as a gamer, but as a previous gamer, I'm also pretty interested in tech, in the world of tech. So either from a gamer perspective or an IT perspective, I try to follow the latest trends. So we do have more sophisticated technologies that are available to us to a point where you see them used already at not a mainstream level, but enough that you can argue that this could be mainstream. And I'm talking about technologies such as VR and AR. VR standing for virtual reality and AR for augmented reality. And I don't know, should I explain just like a little bit of what these things are, or?
Yeah, because we're also integrating some of them to DiGi YOUTH as well, into the future DiGi YOUTH.
So, virtual reality is where you have, now this is, have to explain VR. So it's having a virtual room, a virtual reality, which is aided by the use of some sophisticated technology. Sophisticated is because it's pretty revolutionary at this point. So you have to wear some form of goggles, and you have no connection to the actual reality that you are at that point. So you're in a microcosmos. So another way, maybe it's more colloquially known as like the metaverse, is a form of virtual reality, and then VR, different games. And so imagine the ability to create a classroom that is situated in the savannah, and you could bring historians from anywhere, being fully immersed. Versus augmented reality, in augmented reality, you have the mix, the blend of both visualizing the current space that you are, but through some goggles, which they're less, let's say, sophisticated in that case, you get to interact with it, with your own environment. So these are starting to be used in educational games and offering, different immersive experiences that enhance learning, because you get to tell stories through VR. You get to experience things like tactile. You get to walk in your virtual reality and uncover things. So you can imagine a history lesson where you can walk through a visual recreation of ancient Rome, or a biology lesson where you can interact with, let's say, the 3D model of a cell. So, the benefits are just crazy. It's just that it's difficult to be implemented due to a high cost. The cost of making the software is expensive for both AR and VR. The equipment is also on the pricier side, and it requires digital knowledge from the facilitator or the educator. But ideally, we're talking about the future. That's one of it. The other one would be adaptive learning. This is a new technique, a newish technique, I would say, maybe more relevant now. That there are games that adjust the difficulty level or the content based on the player's performance, on pacing and style. So we're trying to, as I mentioned before, in this large digital landscape that we have, we can facilitate different types of senses, right? We can facilitate different paces, but adjusting the difficulty, the comprehension on the level of the player, on individual, this is something that, can happen later. It's difficult to do so. In some games in the past, even now, you get to choose your difficulty. It's in many games. I personally go for the easy one because I want the story and everything. And I know players that, go for the harder part. But you could do that with learning as well. Instead of having a standardized course, through AI, through a lot of writing maybe as well, you can adapt it. Then it's funny because in this podcast I'm just bringing more things that I am. So I was a gamer, I'm a youth worker, and I'm involved in tech, but something I really like as well is data or data, depending on which region you're listening from. So data for me is very important. I always like looking at numbers because as more learning takes place in simulation, there are more opportunities to collect data on student performance and engagement. And this can give us valuable insights on educators. Help them understand where exactly are you struggling and what are you most engaged with, what works and what doesn't. Now, this is something in schools, at least from my experience, is something that you don't see. Who's getting the data from this? Because you are, let's say, an educator, a youth worker, and you have this group of 10, 20 people, and you yourself may know at that point for that year that okay, those students X, Y, Z are doing better because I'm doing this, but you can't have that data set for everyone. And when you put things on the digital things where we have a lot of 1 and zeros and we have the ability to collect things, we can understand what works. So that's something I'm trying to personally see how to be able to extract data, not to sell, of course, but to enhance, to see what works. So we do questionnaires, and this is a part of reflection the youth work you do. You have a questionnaire, a scale 1 to 10. I learned, I didn't learn. What stuck with me? And we do this for every simulation and learning game that we have. We evaluate what went right. How right did it go? How wrong did it go? So data-driven insights, I would say, overall. Let's focus then on the 21st century, critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, collaboration. These are let's say, concepts I think that are very trendy to speak of, but in education, in formal education at least, in my context, I haven't seen much of this being available. So digital learning tools and simulations can help on that because we do focus on critical thinking. For instance, in DiGi YOUTH as well, we have some questions you need to be critical about. In the game Gamify that you mentioned, it is all about critical thinking. In DiGi, we have a lot of problem solving and collaboration because we have also the hub. In other games where we can be a bit more open and more sandbox kind of games, we try to employ as much as creativity. So I would say a focus should be on these, let's say, skills because they're highly valued and they're difficult to learn in a traditional setting, but they can be learned pretty easily through a game-based learning system. And
as you mentioned, use the simulation games in groups. And that's also like a team building exercise or understanding how to work with teams and how to be part of a team more effectively.
Yeah, exactly. And that's largely due to the role of the facilitator as well, to focus on these things. Because the facilitator would want the youth worker would want to pass on some knowledge, but they have to have in mind these skills that are difficult to learn in whatever other environment. And lastly, this is more of let's say personal ambition. It's to increase social and emotional learning, to have a safe space for young people to explore emotional and social situations, practice empathy, develop social skills, learn more about their emotional skills. So it's something that it's difficult to do in a game, but there are a lot of games that people play that are story-based, sort of, and actually invite, for you to learn emotionally. But especially with everything that's been going on a global scale, social situations and emotional situations are difficult to examine and replicate and teach. So for me, a nice future would be the ability to educate on how to learn, how to develop the social and emotional skills through gaming or through simulations or through learning tools. Yeah, so I think that would be, I don't think I have another point. I mean, I could go on talking for more, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot in the future. And I also, like you, believe that there's a lot more to expand and to learn on in simulation and learning games. And a lot of benefits to be reaped for young people. Yeah, so thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Thank you for sharing so much insight. And we'll do another podcast or video or around the DiGi Youth forums.
More interactive materials. Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening. Yeah, goodbye.
Thank you for listening to this DiGi Youth 2.0 podcast. For more educational materials, find us at digi-youth.com.